Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name is Wade Kloos, and my partner today in this workshop is the always animated Paul Gedge. Most of you know Paul. Paul and I and you are here today to start a conversation about presentational literacy. So what do we mean by presentation literacy? You know, in its simplest form, it's really just being able to speak in public. But I think a better way to approach it might be to, it's the understanding of how to deliver your content in a way that resonates with your audience. And perhaps even a better way to think about it is really finding the most impactful way to share information about yourself and what you care about. So we want to go ahead and kick off this workshop with a presentation video. We want to take you guys to TED. How many of you, by the raise of hands, know what TED is? All right, now with your hands still up. No, that was awkward. How many of you think that that is about a beer drinking, pot smoking, talking teddy bear? I'm not at all surprised that Buck was. That's why I hang out with Buck. All right, so TED is a global presentation platform. Their moniker is Ideas Worth Spreading. So we're going to take you into a short clip. It's only about 5 minutes. You don't have to sit through an entire TED presentation. But let's take a look at that video now.
Well, this is a really extraordinary honor for me. I spend most of my time in jails, in prisons, on death row. I spend most of my time in very low-income communities, in the projects, and places where there's a great deal of hopelessness. And being here at TED and seeing the stimulation, hearing it, has been very, very energizing to me. And one of the things that's emerged in my short time here is that TED has an identity. And you can actually say things here that have impacts around the world, and sometimes when it comes through TED, it has meaning and power that it doesn't have when it doesn't. And I mention that because I think identity is really important. And we've had some fantastic presentations, and I think what we've learned is that if you're a teacher, your words can be meaningful, but if you're a compassionate teacher, they can be especially meaningful. If you're a doctor, you can do some good things, but if you're a caring doctor, you can do some other things. So I want to talk about the power of identity. And I didn't learn about this actually practicing law and doing the work that I do. I actually learned about this from my grandmother. I grew up in a house that was the traditional African-American home that was dominated by a matriarch, and that matriarch was my grandmother. She was tough, she was strong, she was powerful. She was the end of every argument in our family. She was the beginning of a lot of arguments in our family. She was the daughter of people who were actually enslaved. Her parents were born in slavery in Virginia in the 1840s. She was born in the 1880s, and the experience of slavery very much shaped the way she saw the world. My grandmother was tough, but she was also loving. When I would see her as a little boy, she'd come up to me and she'd give me these hugs, and she'd squeeze me so tight I could barely breathe. And then she'd let me go. And an hour or two later, if I saw her, she'd come over to me and she'd say, "Brian, do you still feel me hugging you?" And if I said no, she'd assault me again, and if I'd say yes, she'd leave me alone. And then she just had this quality that you always wanted to be near her. And the only challenge was that she had 10 children. My mom was the youngest of her 10 kids, and sometimes when I would go and spend time with her, it'd be difficult to get her time and attention. My cousins would be running around everywhere, and I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, waking up one morning, going into the living room, and all of my cousins were running around, and my grandmother was sitting across the room staring at me. And at first I thought we were playing a game. And I would look at her and I'd smile, but she was very serious. And after about 15 or 20 minutes of this, she got up and she came across the room and she took me by the hand and she said, "Come on, Brian, you and I are going to have a talk." And I remember this just like it happened yesterday. I never will forget it. She took me out back and she said, "Brian, I'm going to tell you something, but you don't tell anybody what I tell you." I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "Now you make sure you don't do that." I said, sure. Then she sat me down and she looked at me and she said, I want you to know I've been watching you. And she said, I think you're special. She said, I think you can do anything you want to do. I will never forget it. And then she said, I just need you to promise me 3 things, Brian. I said, okay, Mom. And she said, the first thing I want you to promise me is that you'll always love your mom. She said, that's my baby girl, and you have to promise me now you'll always take care of her. Well, I adored my mom, so I said, yes, Mama, I'll do that. Then she said, the second thing I want you to promise me is that you'll always do the right thing, even when the right thing is the hard thing. And I thought about it, and I said, yes, Mama, I'll do that. Then finally she said, the third thing I want you to promise me is that you'll never drink alcohol. Well, I was 9 years old, so I said, yes, Mama, I'll do that. I grew up in the country in the rural South, and I have a brother a year older than me and a sister a year younger. And when I was about 14 or 15, one day my brother came home, and he had this 6-pack of beer. I don't know where he got it. And he grabbed me and my sister, and we went out in the woods, and we were kind of just out there doing the stuff we crazily did. And he had a sip of this beer, and he gave some to my sister, and she had some, and they offered it to me. And I said, no, that's okay. Y'all go ahead. I'm not going to have any beer. And my brother said, come on, we're doing this today. You always do what we do. I had some, your sister had some, have some beer. I said, no, I don't feel right about that. Y'all go ahead. And then my brother started staring at me. He said, what's wrong with you? Have some beer. Then he looked at me real hard. He said, oh, I hope you're not still hung up on that conversation Mama had with you. I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, oh, Mama tells all the grandkids that they're special. I was devastated. And I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. I know this might be broadcast broadly, but I'm 52 years old, and I'm going to admit to you that I've never had a drop of alcohol. I don't say that because I think that's virtuous. I say that because there is power in identity. When we create the right kind of identity, we can say things to the world around us that they don't actually believe makes sense. We can get them to do things that they don't think they can do.
So I too am 52 years old, but I'm stopping the comparisons there. What were your impressions? Does anybody want to offer anything that they felt about this individual, about the perception of who he is and what he was even going to talk about? Does anybody want to throw out a comment? Yeah.
Seems very authentic, which is not
Authentic. Yep. Well, we're going to come back to this as a reference in a little bit, and so we'll hear a little bit more about that. So our goal today is to inform you of the ways you can become a more effective speaker, maximizing your ability to influence your listeners. Now, there are many facets that make up great presentations, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover every single component of that today. But if you tell us that you're hungry for more, we are happy to schedule more of these brown bags and dive deeper into the things you care about most. Now, for the next hour or so, Paul and I are going to be talking about our insights on presentations, both from our experience in giving them as well as listening to them. And by the way, there's probably nobody in this room that has more exposure to all of your presentations than Paul. Now, we are not going to throw anybody under the bus, right, Paul? All right, that's not our intent today. Paul and I work for DNR administration. We're part of a small team that makes up a group dedicated to establishing a department-wide audiovisual service. And it's our mission to raise the bar for all of our events, the way they're broadcast, the way they are archived, shared, and this includes the quality of our collective presentations. So we're excited about that, and we hope you guys are too. Before we jump into our content, I do have a confession to make. I am far from a great presenter. I have a number of flaws. But one of those flaws is I'm not very comfortable with that awkward thing called silence. I usually wind up filling it with my own unique but very insightful or does anybody else do this? So I thought, let me back up here. I thought that what we might be able to take advantage of today, given our content, is I can expose this flaw, or better yet, maybe even try to correct it. Do you guys know about those training shock collars for dogs? So I thought if I put one into my pocket, my back pocket, I'd give the remote to Paul, and every time I said, I'd get a suggestion that perhaps that awkward silence was going to be okay. Well, Paul said that it would interfere with CapNet or something, so I left it at home, much to my Labrador's disappointment. He seemed kind of rather eager for me to give it a go. We are recording today's event, and so this is a good time for us to plug our YouTube channel. This event will be accessible by the same link that we sent out for the now in progress live streaming of this event. We'll post it in a day or two. So it'll be up there at our YouTube channel. So remember to like the video and smash that subscribe button. I don't really know what that means. Paul told me to say that. Okay, so now I want to take us to a place where a 30,000-foot view of why presentations matter. They matter, I guess if I was to sum this all up in one word, I'd say it was probably credibility. But really, more accurately, it's your credibility. And that's kind of important, don't you think? Even though you are the one standing in front of people, you're really representing your division's effectiveness, your own abilities, your department's reputation. So really, your presentation opportunity is really bigger than just you. You also have this great opportunity to share your work and your passion. How cool is that? That's something to be excited about. Presentations matter because there's this concept of future viewers. So what does that mean? It means that just because this is the number of people in this room, they're not the only ones that perhaps might view this presentation. So we have folks in regional offices and others, and the fact that we're recording it, there's a good chance that this is going to be viewed by many, many more people. I'm not just talking about this presentation, but your future presentations. Be aware, we're doing more of that now. It's almost an expectation. And lastly, I want to say why presentations matter. It's really about advancing yourself. Public speaking skills are highly leverageable in your careers, probably more so than most other skill sets that you might possess. So communication matters. People and your audience, your future audiences specifically, they're bombarded with all forms of communication, from the moment they get up, from the radio that they listen to on their drive into work, the signs that they see, the billboards that they read, the bumper stickers. All those things are embedded in the heads of your audience. And this is your competition of sorts. So your presentations will leave an impression. Really, the only question is, what kind of an impression are you going to make? Well, because all this information comes into our heads, really, our minds subconsciously begin to divide up all the things that they receive, all the information throughout the day, and we sort of establish some simple categories for filing away what information we hear. So it could be perhaps good, filed in the good filing cabinet, maybe it's bad, or maybe it's indifferent. Those last two, those are not the impressions you want. As you saw, if it was indifferent, it's basically forgettable. So really, with only good and bad impressions being generally recallable by most people, there's a lot riding on your presentation. So a wise man once said, meeting tomorrow's needs and opportunities requires our attention today. Our best thinking is needed now. Our best problem solving and our best planning are required today. Does anybody know who said that? Famous philosopher. Does anybody recognize this guy? Right? So that's our executive director, Mike Styler. He said that in the very latest 2018 annual report. You guys telling me you didn't read it? When DNR staff speak to the public, our boards, the state legislature, we need our very best presentations. But these do not happen by accident. And this is why Paul and I want to raise awareness of public speaking skills and to help you deliver truly remarkable presentations. So I want to focus now on intent. This is a pretty basic concept, but not one that I think gets a lot of attention. We're often called upon by our bosses to be the subject matter experts at the next board meeting, at some conference on some discipline or some subject, and we may then therefore perceive that we need to be the smartest person in the room. So we collect all this data, all this science, facts and figures, research findings and science. But is this really the talking opportunity's intent? Or was it even the intent of your boss? Asking these questions early in your preparation is critical to ensure that your content and your delivery is consistent with the intent of your presentation. So what are some of DNR's presentation intents? We thought if Natasha would be willing to write down a few of your ideas, maybe a few presentations that you have given, think back on them to think about what would be a typical DNR intention for a presentation. Now, I'm going to call on people if you don't raise your hands. That's just how it's going to happen. All right, Devin, you got the biggest smile in the group. What is an intention of a park and recreation presentation to the public?
A lot of it's about safety.
Awesome. So what is it about safety?
Whether it be, is it working?
Yeah.
Okay. Life jacket awareness, helmet wear.
Great. Okay, so one is to inform. So if we could write down inform the public. Now I'm going to guess that part of that has to do with changing behavior, right? It would be our intent to change their behavior. Okay. What are some other ideas for intentions of presentations? Blake, you look deep in thought.
Well, I was going to say inform the public, but I guess some of many of the presentations at least I give are meant to educate the public with regard to a process, an upcoming process that may be foreign to them.
Okay. Letting them understand what state policy is.
Correct.
All right. So to the extent that we share our business practices with them. Anybody else have an intention? Right here, Paul?
I know in wildlife, a lot of ours are centered around making a recommendation.
Awesome. Okay, so the comment was making a recommendation. So your job was to essentially understand a subject, use your expertise, because that's your job, and to make a recommendation. Great. Yes.
I think one intent is to persuade your audience
Awesome.
that your recommendation or to the board or whatever is credible.
That's awesome. Persuasion as an intent. Anybody else have some ideas? Yes.
For abandoned mine projects, we're doing the federal NEPA process, so my presentations give some information and then solicit input
Awesome.
about things we may not know about the area.
Okay, so collecting input. Okay, so some of the other things that we might do is trying to gain some consensus, maybe rallying our stakeholders and aligning priorities, for example. Has anybody ever been in a situation where they had to kind of justify their program? Anybody been to the state legislature appropriation committee? That's a tough gig. That's why they pay your directors the big bucks. But seeking funding is one of them. Justification of a program. These are all intentions. Thank you for sharing those with us. Rarely, I expect, would our intentions actually be to be the smartest person in the room. When you do take the time to better understand your intent, you're already moving your presentation down the right path, because now your talking points that you begin to think about can be consistent with the destination you want to get to. Okay. Now, one of the other intentions that you should have as a presenter is when you stand before an audience, I hope that you recognize there should be an intention to make a connection with your audience. Only through your content and the actions can you actually establish a real connection. You just cannot fake this rapport. So you need to be purposeful in your approach to establishing a connection with your audience. Here are a few things that can help you. Demonstrate your passion for what it is you do. Don't be the stereotypical government employee that's here to do a job. That should turn off an audience right away if that's the approach that you take to this. Audiences respond favorably to people who are genuinely excited about the work that they do. Show that you're glad to be there by smiling and making eye contact, like me. This is a great gig. Be vulnerable. Tell them you're nervous if you are in fact nervous. Tell them a personal story like we saw in the beginning video. Park your ego. Nobody wants to hear your opinions about yourself. Now, perhaps if you are a little self-deprecating, you can gain a humor factor, but use it wisely. My recommendation to you, if you plan on using humor, is to get input from others. Not only to find out if you are in fact funny, but if it's appropriate. I've heard a few attempts by DNR staff at humor. It does not always go as planned. So give that some careful consideration. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of a video that brings in some humor, and then I want to get your opinions from that after that. Roll the video.
I have an interest in education. Actually, what I find is everybody has an interest in education, don't you? I find this very interesting. If you're at a dinner party and you say you work in education, actually, you're not often at dinner parties, frankly. If you work in education, you're not asked, you know, and you're never asked back, curiously. That's I think it strikes me. But if you are, and you say to somebody, they say, what do you do? And you say, you work in education, you can see the blood run from their face. They think, oh my God, you know, why me? It's my one night out all week. But if you ask people about their education.
Okay. How did you guys perceive that? Did that seem pretty natural? He was pretty laid back, wasn't he? It was pretty easy to connect. He obviously was an educator. And so he was poking fun at himself at, sorry about this, I'm messing with my slides here. But what he did is he presented something that we probably can relate to, and that is boring people at a dinner party. So what this begins to do is open up the audience's mind to something that is easily relatable. They maybe open themselves up just a little bit to be responsive. Okay, and the reason that this kind of connection is important is because in every audience, you can experience a little bit of this. It's a tough-looking crowd, isn't it? Skepticism, mistrust, incomprehension, boredom. Does anybody want to guess the last one? Love, admiration. Yeah, not everybody's going to like you. So just be prepared with that. But when we connect with people, they lower their barriers to entry. And it opens up their minds to receive and perhaps even cultivate the idea you're trying to plant the seed in their head with. Now that you're potentially connected and barriers have been dropped, how can we maximize this opportunity? So clearly you want to be able to present new information, something that they haven't heard before. But more than this, you want to evoke a sense of curiosity. So how do you spark curiosity? You can do that by framing some very unique questions, something that's provoking, intriguing, and then answer it. Like, what is the one thing you can do to cut your water consumption by 35%? Or maybe the top 3 reasons why you want to limit your water use in 2018. You want to challenge your audience's understanding. And you want to create a gap in their worldview and then fill it with the information that you have to present. So, for example, sage grouse is not an endangered species in Utah. And here's why. Okay? Another example might be, we kill more deer with vehicles than we do with guns. Changing, having something unexpected opens one's mind to receiving new information. So these, it's not every day that you get somebody to say, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And they become more receptive to the message that you want to do. So in addition to curiosity, your intent might also include trying to inspire somebody, or like this gentleman said, persuade. So how do you inspire? Well, if you show that you care, that's the first way to get somebody else to care. Demonstrate your conviction. So you can hear it in somebody's voice when they are certain that in what they believe in. And that carries forth with it some inspiration. You want to challenge the audience. Conserving water or adopting safety measures, that setting up a challenge for them can be inspirational. Be willing to lead. Show that you're a leader and you can lead them on this journey. Use visuals to evoke emotions. Now, we usually do a pretty good job of this. This is usually pretty compelling. Here's one. It can be tough to look at, but it only underscores the significance of why we do what we do. And what about this one? So after the chuckles, you kind of begin to feel some other emotion, like this bear is going to die without some wildlife intervention. And then maybe you start to feel a little angry at the camper that thought it was okay to bring a 2-gallon container of Cheetos and left it on the campsite. So I'll tell you that Jarhead here did survive, but it took 10 days. He didn't have water, didn't have food for 10 days, except for what was in the jar. Here's another one. This is a video clip. Let's roll that.
Just caught my first tiger trout.
No way.
Can
Where was
believe
it?
it?
Did you see it?
No. It was, see that white rock in the water?
Yeah.
That rock, it was right behind
Isn't that awesome? I mean, this is inspirational. This is compelling. This is emotional. This was shown last year, again, at an Appropriations Committee meeting. So inspiration can be a powerful message because people respond to emotions more than they do by hearing logic. Persuasion is difficult, though, especially when they're offered just data. Kind of that proof that I'm the smartest person in the room and just filled with data only. So I hope you can begin to appreciate that in order to get into the minds of an audience, you really have to do more than just present information. Okay, so to persuade someone to think or act a way consistent with your worldview, your main message, you must first appreciate this. Why is more important than how or what? People don't buy in to your position because of what you do or how you do it. They buy in because of why you do it. One more time for impact. People don't buy into your position because of what you do or how you do it. They buy in because of why you do it. Tell the audience why your program exists. What is your mission? Tell them your beliefs and what makes your heart sing to do this kind of work. DNR shares lots of facts and figures, and that's great, but they don't drive behavior. To give you an extreme example of persuasion, remember back that first video clip that we showed? Brian Stevenson spoke on the power of identity and the injustice of our criminal justice system in this country. Admittedly, you guys didn't hear that part. He was so successful at establishing a connection with that TED audience and giving them both an emotional and a logical reason to care that he persuaded them to donate more than $1 million to his cause without ever verbalizing a request for a donation in his presentation. That's pretty cool. He spent 5 minutes of his limited time at TED to tell that story. You think that had some contribution towards those donations? It's a pretty powerful story now, isn't it? Okay. We want to shift gears just a little bit here. Again, I want to hear from you. We're going to call on you guys. I want to hear specifically what you believe are some of the presentation challenges that you have. Or if you want to tell us what you're really super psyched about learning. We want to know that because we can't cover everything here today. So I will ask for volunteers, and then I'm going to start calling on people. That's how it works. Candace.
Just thinking about the challenges is, thank you. Whoa. I think some of the challenges we have is, I'm passionate about my work, but sometimes particular presentation topics are not super exciting.
Okay, so finding the passion in what may be typical.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Finding passion. Yeah, Eric.
Making, minute
Hi.
incremental change reports interesting.
Okay, so updating status reports in a way that maybe is just consistent with your intent. It's okay if your intent is to update, Are we going to inspire? Are we going to change behavior? It's not always our mission, is it? That's why I started and spent so much time talking about intent. Thank you. What's another challenge or what's another presentation technique that you want to work on?
So, is it on?
Yes.
As I listen to this in wildlife, it's a little bit different sometimes because it's more controlling the emotion in the room. It's not that we have a hard time conveying passion or having a passionate constituency, but it's making sure that it doesn't get out of hand.
Like how?
People are already really passionate about wildlife, so when you're presenting your recommendations.
Okay.
It's controlling that narrative and making sure that you're not going to convince everybody, which is fine. That's okay. And there's a lot of it that is a social component too. It's okay to disagree, but some of it is, again, not bringing so much emotion into it, but making sure that it doesn't get too emotional and
Okay.
then out of control. And I've seen wildlife meetings and presentations spin out of control because
Okay.
of emotion.
Yeah, so I heard being prepared for alternative viewpoints. And it may just be that you are, in fact, attempting to, I think it's always good to recognize the other viewpoints, and that might, in some ways, enable you to kind of calm them down if you acknowledge that they're there. Thank you for that. Anybody else have a particular challenge about presentations that they struggle with the most? Yes.
A balance between, especially if you're doing a PowerPoint, slide content with
Okay.
just data, here's my next slide stuff, here's my
Okay.
next slide stuff.
So kind of continuity between slides and your message.
Yes.
Okay? And speaking about slides, there's probably many books out there to tell you about what to do and what not to do on PowerPoint slides. We probably won't get into that too much, but I could see this being a subject of, hey, PowerPoint 101 as a brown bag. Come in, we'll talk to you about it. Anybody have anything else that they'd like to mention? Yes.
I think it's also pretty important, I guess, to use your term, to be the smartest person in the room, because at the end of presentation, you always ask any questions, and then you just kind of open up a whole bag of issues with that. And I guess I'm not comfortable with answering the question with, I don't know.
Okay, that's good. Preparing for questions. Thank you for that. That's good insight. And I think it's fair that we may not always have the right answer. It's better than giving the wrong one, isn't it? Yes.
Stopping or sharing too much information. Too much.
Okay, so Buck said talking too much and sharing too much information. Boy, really, you kind of have to know your organization's position on something to know where you can draw the line. So oversharing, great. Anybody else? Yes.
I think one of the things I've noticed the most is sometimes we'll present something and a question or a comment will be made, and so we'll say what we're talking about again, and we're not actually answering the questions that they're asking, even though we're hearing the words. I don't know that we always listen to what they're trying to say to us. We kind of miss the boat.
What was that?
Yeah.
Not listening. So being active listeners while still playing that role of presenter and being able to respond to that. Okay. Yeah, Buck.
Forgetting. Like completely forgetting 3 or 4 slides.
I can relate with that. Just keeping track, keeping pace. And I'll tell you, it might be an interesting dialogue perhaps after this workshop, is both Paul and I, you can imagine, in preparation for a presentation, on presentations, we learned a little bit. It's really quite revealing. Be happy to share that with you guys. Thank you for writing those down. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how you go about crafting your content. Now, usually you have a pretty good idea as to the scope of what it is that you're going to present or you need to present on, but carefully refining your topic can really help you in the way in which you start to just align your talking points. So again, you really want to identify what's your point, what's your main message. You want to strive to produce just one big idea in your presentations. Too many points are hard to follow. Your emphasis might be hard to track in terms of which one is more important. So especially if each of your components wind up coming with their own data to interpret and other abstractions, it can get really distracting. So if you can distill your main message down to almost like a very concise Twitter-like title that hopefully evokes some curiosity, like we saw, like we talked about a little bit. You can begin to simplify the task of building up your talking points. So, there are a few things that will frame and constrain your content, specifically knowledge of your audience. What is it that they know about the topic and their familiarity with your concepts? So, of course, talking to a lay audience is quite different than talking to people in your field. So you're going to need to remove the jargon as much as possible and be mindful of the complexity of your talking points. In other words, what you want to do is simplify. Simplify. So to help me, I brought this guy in because he seems to be pretty well known. I thought that was a pretty good quote in terms of everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. Now, he also said that if you can't explain something simply, you just don't know your subject well enough. It's a hard task to take the complex and move it into something that is easily tangible. So the second factor affecting the framing of your content is time. How much time are you allotted, and how much time do you think you need? So if you're the type of presenter that never feels like they are given enough time to cover all of your talking points, you really need to adjust how you approach your talking points. Your audience has a very short attention span, as I can tell by some of the faces in the room. You really have to get to your point fairly quickly. I would say 15 minutes to develop and convey your message. 20 minutes at the uppermost. So I put this one in here not because I think it's particularly profound, but as an example that not all quotes are worth very much. With these constraints, though, on your content, you have this opportunity to be creative and methodical about the reduction of non-essential, low-impact content that you have to filter out of your presentation. It's not how many facts you present within your presentation that matters. It is simply your ability to present in sufficient detail to compel your audience, compel them to remember, compel them to act. I included this one because I think it's particularly profound. You can do a lot of things in PowerPoint. It's kind of cool. Okay, so I want to share with you a presentation concept. It's called the Throughline. What a Throughline can do for your presentation is provide a common thread for your audience to connect the dots between the points you want to make and the points you want them to take home. Okay, so here's some examples in terms of titles. More choice actually makes us less happy. The title of that TED Talk was The Paradox of Change, or the Paradox of Choice. But what I hope you can begin to appreciate here is that these are somewhat interesting. You might be inspired to click on the link if it, again, fills some void in your understanding. Okay, so now I want to share a DNR example, says the people from Parks. All right, so the through line, more people having more fun in more parks more often. This was a presentation that Director Fred Hayes did up at the legislature last year. And these are some of the major points that he included as his talking points. They improved their maintenance process. They were replacing old structures. Their whole team is focused on customer service and delivering the very best customer experiences. They do that by producing more and better activities in their parks, and they're actively engaging with the private industry, business partners that improves local economies. They provided some pretty simple illustrations, some data that is easy to interpret, And they created an emotional connection with the audience by showing real people doing exciting things in their parks. Fred's message was pretty simple to understand, but Fred is very effective at creating a rapport with his audience. Again, pretty simple message, but he does this in a way in which he builds trust. So he is able to motivate a lot of folks. And if Fred has one problem, it is that oftentimes the legislature wants to give him even more money than he knows what to do with. Because he is so good at creating an emotional motivation for all things outdoors. It seems like every legislator has an idea for a great park. Okay, yes, we're going to do a little math. So bring out your phones. That's right, you probably thought, wait a second. Presentations, really, I have to deal with math. But there's a concept here I want to share with you. So this represents what again? Your through line. And inside of our through line, we build content. So you're throwing words out there. You are providing a context. You're adding data components. You provide examples and graphics. These are in no particular order. They're just there. And what I would say is this represents the information input to your conversation. Now, where else can we get information from? An information input. It doesn't look too dissimilar from a staff report, a magazine, a book. But the difference between a presentation and those other sources is this. There is a human input to it, and this is where you come in. So these are the things that we've kind of been talking about, the things that you as a presenter have the abilities to go in and do. The unique way you talk, the way you emphasize, the gestures you make, the way you show your passion and your beliefs, and the trust that you earn. That's the human factor. So hold on to your socks. Here's the math. It's a simple equation, really. If you take both inputs, add them together, what do you get? You really are talking about your presentation impact. And what would that look like? These are some of the things that I think we're striving for. So we talked about connection, engagement, curiosity, empathy. This is the impact you have the ability to create. And if you take the aggregate of these, what do you come up with? We believe that there's an opportunity to have a very inspired audience. Inspired for what? Maybe to see the world as you see the world. You plant the seed and it inspires them to see it just the way you do. Or to maybe behave differently on their next outdoor adventure. Okay, so maybe an easier way to think of the math equation here is simply looking at it this way. You really have this opportunity to take all the skills that you bring as a person that only you can do. So you bring your humanity into the picture, you put your authoritative content, and what you're hoping to do is inspire your audience. And it's to the nth power, which is pretty cool. More math. Because every time that presentation gets viewed, you get another degree of impact. That's pretty powerful. Okay. Let's talk about structure. How do you go about structuring the content that you've just built? Well, one way to do that is to begin to, again, think of it as your through line and approach it this way. Your introduction. It's a pretty typical place to start. But it is a very important area of your presentation that you have to craft really carefully. Why? Because you're making your very first impressions, not only about you, but about your message. So come out with a unique way to deliver your through line. And because this is so important in the scope of your presentation, you may want to memorize what it is you open with. Inside of context, this is where you're sharing where or why things are important and why your audience should care. Within main concepts, this is where you're providing real-world examples that demonstrate your point. Under practical implications, this might be where your solutions come in, your particular viewpoint, what you bring to the table. And to end, a conclusion that ties it all together. And like your first part of the presentation, people remember the first and the last pretty well. So choose your words carefully, maybe memorize your departing comments, because they are very impactful. Now, one way to think of this is it might be you are telling them what, so what, and now what as components of structure to your talk. The last thing I want to end on is storytelling. Is this concept that great presentations often have some components of stories. We saw what it was like in the first video we showed you, and people are pre-wired to enjoy and receive stories. That's the dopamine part of this. And it helps to create a familiarity with whatever your story is, with their reality, because it's probably not too dissimilar from maybe another life experience, or they can connect the dots, or they heard a similar story before. So again, it makes your message easier to envision when you can put it in the form of a story. Now, it could be your story, but it doesn't have to be. That's kind of cool. So here's a video example of a story that the presenter didn't own. Let's go to that.
And the third thing about intelligence is it's distinct. I'm doing a new book at the moment called Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated by how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynne. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer, and everybody knows her work. She did Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Gillian and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. She couldn't concentrate. She was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s, and ADHD hadn't been invented, at this point. So it wasn't an available condition. People weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak-paneled room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, her homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So he said, wait here, we'll be back. We won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother, and he said, Mrs. Lynne, Gillian isn't sick. She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? He said, she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Lynne Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multi-millionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down. Now, I think...
That's a pretty cool story. But it wasn't his. So I think everybody has a story. And even if it's not you, I'll bet you there's somebody in your program, somebody that can help you craft your message that you can apply, I'm going to guess, probably a lot of years of experience from which they could draw stories from. I know and I've heard great stories from our DNR people. So your stories need to be true, though. They should include a very interesting character that not only is consistent with your through line, but they really help provide a simple example of your point, and then it will resonate. So analogies and metaphors and parables, these are all things that you might be able to use if they make sense. Things like, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Crazy like a fox. These are mental concepts that people already have in their head. So if you can link to some of those concepts as a way to tell a story, people will get it. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn this talk over to Paul.
I'm very excited to be with you. A little bit nervous. My comfort place is behind the scenes, behind the technology. But I have had the pleasure to witness the greatness of this agency. I'd like to start off going through a DNR experience that some of you might not experience. I spent a lot of time in board meetings, and let me take you through the journey of one. Go ahead and roll the first video, please.
Justin Shannon. Use of public hunters to aid in deer research. You're the last one. Wow us.
Pause it, please. Often we're thrown curveballs. Chairman Blair is being approached on a project that needs their sponsorship, their commitment. Go ahead and please roll the video.
We're all tired and falling asleep, so your work's cut out for you.
I'll remember the 5 B's.
Yeah?
Be brief, brother, be brief. Mr. Chair, board members, today I'm going to present a short presentation on using public hunters to aid in deer research. On the Paunsaugunt unit, there are areas with high concentrations of bucks that have antler deformities. We want to better understand what's causing these antler deformities. It seems like in many pockets, there just tends to be pockets of high densities of these. And candidly, we know very little about.
Video, please. I want to ask each of you in these clips to watch the body language, the reactions, those pieces that communicate visually. Go ahead and skip to the next video. This is where the story unfolds in April of 2017. We are summoned to report back to the board on what they commissioned us to do. Go ahead and roll.
Paunsaugunt Cactus Buck Research Update by Annette. Annette, how do I say your last name? Is it Rogue?
Go ahead and pause. This is Director Sheehan. John is the chair. Mr. Woodward is the vice chair.
Well, and you're the wildlife vet.
Pause for a second. Our leadership is connected with your presentations. As you watch Greg for a moment, you'll see excitement. I would inject he's proud of the work we do. If you don't feel connected with those that ask you to present, clarify, unite on the same vision. They are proud of your work. Go ahead and continue.
Veterinarian?
Yes.
How's the vet business? That's pretty cool. You get to be the vet for the deer. Does Justin ever bring his dog to you? Is the question we're all wanting to know.
Justin doesn't.
Okay.
Go ahead and pause. Annette is our subject matter expert. Now, what these clips do not tell you, I'm sorry, I get emotional. I'm very proud of you guys. During her presentation, everyone was glued with intensity. Everyone came out of there with greater knowledge. She may appear nervous. I want you to pay attention to the transition the presenter goes through during this natural process. Go ahead and continue the video.
So just
hop back one, please.
Paunsaugunt Cactus Buck Research Update by Annette. Annette, how do I say your last name? Is it Rogue? And you're the wildlife veterinarian?
Yes.
How's the vet business? That's pretty cool. You get to be the vet for the deer. Does Justin ever bring his dog to you? Is the question we're all wanting to know.
Justin doesn't.
Okay. I know, that's no joke.
Okay, so I'll give you an update on the study which was approved.
Pull your microphone now.
Can you hear? Okay.
I'd like to make you as nervous as possible.
You're
so
on
get that
YouTube.
mic.
You will live forever on the interweb, so just so you know.
Okay, I'll give you an update on.
Did you notice how she acknowledged but let it roll off? She stayed present in her task. She did a great job. You'll see there's a few more surprise moments. Go ahead and roll.
The study which was approved by the board in the fall. And so brief overview of what I'm going to present. So I'm going to give you some background on the study, list some previous studies in this field.
You notice she is using visual pieces. Excuse me. I should not have interrupted. My nervousness has come out. Go ahead and continue on. We're not.
And then describe the methods that we used and also explain why we took this approach. Present some preliminary findings and then discuss some next steps and unanswered questions. And I want to stress that we're still analyzing the samples and these are preliminary findings. So these are not conclusive results.
Is that a Uinta Basin accent I'm detecting?
Obvious.
Okay.
Go ahead and pause. Again, her professionalism is staying in the moment. You may have a priceless moment in your presentation. It might be a surprise from another agency or a countering viewpoint from an opposition. Again, notice her body language. She owned the situation. Go ahead and skip to the next clip.
So just a brief review of the antler development, how it should be, and then I'll explain what happens in these cactus bucks that changes the antler development. So bucks shed the antlers in the spring, and then throughout the summer, the testosterone levels are low in the animal. And then during that time, the antlers develop. So the antlers are covered by velvet. They grow. And then as the days shorten, the testosterone levels in the animal increase. The blood flow in the velvet starts to decrease. And then the antlers start to mineralize. And eventually, the velvet is shed. Then the antlers turn into the hardened antlers that we know that are used for fighting and establishing dominance during breeding. As the winter progresses, the testosterone levels drop again. The connection between the pedicles and the antlers start to demineralize, and then eventually they fall off. So the whole cycle is testosterone driven. In the cactus bucks, the cycle is interrupted and basically stays stagnant in the stage where the antlers grow. So that's why.
Now, think back to the image you saw when Justin approached the board for the study. Can you describe those cactus bucks? That moment is memorable. As you can describe yourself at this point, what this anomaly looks like, and we know some of the process involved, there has been successful knowledge transfer. Go ahead and skip to the next video point.
So this is a histopathology. So they've sliced the tissues in very thin slices, stained it to highlight the cellular structure, and then this is under a microscope. So to the right, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is one of the normal bucks. You can see the seminiferous tubules are these big round structures. This is where the sperm production takes place. And to the left, this is from one of the cactus bucks. You can see the tissue is highly fibrotic. It's all filled in.
Do you notice her presence? Do you notice her humility? She may be the smartest person in the room, but she is effectively communicating the elements at this moment. Would this narrative have been effective without the visual? Words tell stories. Visuals tell stories. Go ahead and hop to the next clip, please.
So stay tuned and we'll keep working on it, and hopefully at some other point we can give you another update. And if you have questions, please ask them.
Thank you. Does any of our highly educated board members have questions?
No,
I'm sure you do.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
I have.
Why did everybody
couple
laugh at
questions.
that?
Yeah.
Just a couple. Do these cactus bucks, are they showing you the same kind of reproductive behavior that the normal bucks do? I was just wondering, what's the mechanism for the transfer of these viruses back and forth between deer and cattle?
Curiosity, you had the serum. Why didn't you check the gonadotropin releasing hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone?
Showing off. Showing off your big words.
Shut up. She had it on there. I didn't make them up.
That's a good question. We could
I mean, you
possibly
had
do
the
that.
serology
Yeah,
available.
we have samples in the freezer, so we can look into that for sure. That would be easy to do.
I guess your theory is that it was infectious and not, because of the histopathology, it was infection, not atrophy. And
Yeah.
those hormones would cause atrophy rather than...
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the testosterone gives a feedback mechanism to the brain, so we probably expect those to be altered. It's a good question, and I will look into it. Thank you.
It's a good question that two people in this room understand. So.
Annette was authentic. She was knowledgeable. She was prepared. She was humble, willing to listen, approachable to members of the board. I can feel a sense of connection. This presentation started off with some surprises. I'd like to talk to you about fear. Now, this is me down in the deserts of Nevada. Do I look calm and relaxed? This plank is approximately 150, 200, maybe 300 feet above the chasm. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about addressing fear. I was involved in an event where the presenter came up and told me right before, no, I don't need a mic, I'm okay. And I was shocked. What this presenter did not realize, without the microphone, he could not be heard by his audience, whether it was in a room like this or in places around the world. Fear can be a debilitating aspect, but it can also be a source of strength. As you prepare yourself, this is a great view looking down that plank. On the one side is a very strong steel cable. Tensile strength much stronger than I could break it. At the end of the plank are some bags. These are rope bags that would keep me alive. Being organized, being prepared can equip you for a challenge. I had a chance to do some practice, some dry runs, get to know the tools, know the information. I actually found this was a great way to relax the back. I can remember going over the threshold and that moment of fear. And then that awakening of, I've got this. I trust the environment. Let go of ego. Get feedback, leverage help, reach out. You don't take this journey by yourself. You're not alone. Stress is not always bad. When you perceive it differently, it can lead to enthusiasm. As I was midway on that rope, I'm kind of the blog, but above the truck down below and the top of the plank, it was an incredible sunset. I had a chance to enjoy the moment. Fear, stress, perception. Don't worry about the audience. I believe in you guys. I've been impressed with the content, the attitudes, and it's been a pleasure to serve you in these endeavors. It is a little weird to be on camera at times, but forgetting about it, ignoring, focus on those connections. Don't let the distractions get you. I hope that helps in your travels.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Well, you know, we've been talking at you for about an hour and 45 minutes or so, a little over an hour, I suppose. And I'll just close by kind of saying this, is that you all have a contribution to make. And we know that our DNR employees are making a big difference in their communities and with our natural resources. And with this workshop, what Paul and I are excited about is starting this conversation with you about how you can become the most effective DNR spokesperson that you can be. And that you, as Paul says, you don't have to do it alone. Now, we may not have all the answers, but we are motivated to make you the very best that you can be. So that pretty much wraps up our brown bag. We hope that what we'll do in the next day or so is send out a little bit of feedback. We'll send out something that we'd like to get your impressions, maybe identify for us a course going forward. What content do you want to talk about in a subsequent brown bag? And the other thing is we're also kind of working on a concept of just having a little bit of what we would call a presentation preparation guide, asking some of the questions that we have posed for you today. Things like, how do you intend to make a connection with your audience? And you can use that perhaps as a template just to kind of help prepare for your next presentation. So we look forward to doing that. We have a few minutes. If you guys have some questions for us, we're happy to answer questions or start the conversation about what comes next. So thanks a lot. We appreciate your attention today. Thanks.